We will also be using closed captioning for the duration of the event. However, please forgive the artificial intelligence behind the captioning technology. It is not nearly as intelligent as we are, and it does sometimes make embarrassing mistakes. It will not always be accurate when additional languages, dialects, or names are brought into the discussion. You're welcome to turn it on and off to your preference, and Nika can assist if you're having trouble. The School of Visual Arts is located in New York City on the island, excuse me, on the island of Manhattan, or Manhattan, which is the Lenape word for island, or the place for gathering the wood to make bows, which I think is very apropos to today's conversation, in the region of Lenapehoking, the ancestral homeland and unceded land of the Munsee tribe of the Lenni Lenape people. As an educational institution of practice and research, it is essential for us to be in dialogue with the multitudes of histories that exist in this location, including those that incorporate enslavement, genocide, discrimination, and forced displacement, as well as joyful narratives of creation, integration, and collaboration. It's also a useful reminder that all New Yorkers, with the exception of the Lenape people and other under-recognized Indigenous communities, are immigrants on this land. So thank you so much for joining us today for the Educations of an Artist, a panel discussion featuring the 3 artists in our exhibition, Material Index, which is this year's Young Talent exhibition at the Affordable Art Fair. The exhibition is on view through this Sunday at the Metropolitan Pavilion in Manhattan, and Nika will post the link to the chat for those who are interested. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing artists Lisa Di Donato, Yamchu O, and Arantxa Ximena Rodriguez. I've known these artists for a few years, a little longer than expected when we did the show, because the show was originally scheduled for April of 2020. So it's been a little bit of a stretch, which has been nice. We've gotten to know each other better. And so I've known these artists for a few years in different capacities. And I was drawn to the ways that each of them works with material as physical, historical, and psychical or emotional substance. Material Index explores the relationship between the artist, materials, and identity. Each artist will present a short slideshow of their work, approximately 7 to 10 minutes. After the presentations, I have some questions prepared, and you are also welcome to post your questions in the chat. So we invite you to consider the dialogue between these artists' work and the contemporary moment, as well as how they speak to one another, generating a discourse that would not be possible without the others. Most importantly, in the spirit of the division of continuing education, we wish to spark a conversation about the role of education, both formal and informal, mentored and self-guided, individual and collective, in emergent art practices. Without further ado, let's begin with Lisa.
Hi, everyone. I am Lisa Di Donato, and I am an artist who works with and through photography. And photography and images and the language that is particular to them informs all of my work, whether I am producing images, drawings, or anything else. I'm going to walk you through a brief, long history of my work and how I've used material and the way that it relates to the ideas that I have, but also my relationship to the world around me and my understanding of it. I'd like to begin with this body of work. Is called Sites, and it was made in 2017. These are Diazo Prints. And Diazo is the industrial cousin of cyanotyping. Unlike cyanotyping, they're extremely fugitive. They last maybe a year. They can last longer, but they will definitely change rapidly. And when I was producing this work, it was where I would begin to encounter and eventually confront the complicated relationship between reality and its production of images. And by this, I mean to say that us present in this room and those beyond it, are not the only ones making images. And this body of work really did start to interrogate for me whether or not environment is a psychological dictator unto us, or if we are producing what we see before us, internally. The next body of work I'd like to touch on is it's called In the Garden. And these are a series of prints done on Mylar, and they're suspended several inches away from the wall. This work was significant in that I really stepped forward into a much more psychological and abstract, method of working, and that it would really focus on fluidity. And this became a very important word and quality in my work, that there is something very uncontrollable and that I am perfectly happy in letting that go and run its course to see what it would produce. I also wanted people to understand that there is a sort of toggling between positive and negative space, between memory, time, and the spaces that we inhabit, and the spaces that images produce. And I never wanted that to be resolved. So that is another aspect of these very airy and frequently, hard to pin down images. Hold on, let me just move this to full screen. There we go, that'll make my life easier. Okay, for some reason that's not working. Oh, there we go. These are details. And this also was where I started to realize I still needed some kind of umbilical cord towards the real. I didn't want to divorce myself completely from reality and just chop it off, because I always feel like something needs to be at stake. I come from a background as a painter, and a painter can create anything they wish at any time, anywhere. And for me, that wasn't enough. I really needed something else to really kind of be there, where you deconstruct it, but then it has to come back to a full picture. This next body of work I'd like to talk about is a Bipart dual series of work called Darkness Above and Light Below. And they're separate bodies of work, but they are definitely interdependent. And I began by drawing over photographs that I enlarged greatly. And this work still kind of eludes me towards its absolute meaning. However, it is very important to me in the sense that it began to really indicate to me that I was always really bent on things that were no longer what they were, but they hadn't become something else quite yet. And also this aspect that they'll never be complete. So then I took those drawings and I, through photographic process, inverted them and reproduced them to start to see the things that were not evident within a positive image. But really, you can read them either way, between positive and negative. There's an interchange. And I really enjoy exploring that sort of space. The next, and then what brings us full circle is the series called Ontoglow, which is produced from 2018 and is ongoing. It is the work that is on view at Material Index at the Affordable Art Fair, curated by Keren. And this is where I started taking images that I found on Google Earth, which is the technology that I used to produce the first series that you saw, Sites. And over time, Google began to build up this 3D imagery online that was really flawed and really strange. And I was looking for ways to really call attention to this alien, uninhabited world that was produced by us, but then machines began to reproduce at their own, at their own will. They're reconstructing it constantly. And I wanted to find a way to reify this virtual world into a material one, and combining the fluidity of the Mylar images that you saw from In the Garden, along with the undone qualities of many of the other series that I presented. I began to move forward with this in the tintype process, which is a 19th century form of photography. It came after the daguerreotype. It's more stable, it's less toxic. These images will last centuries perfectly, but it is a handmade process. And because of that and the chemistry and the fluidity of it, it wonderfully introduced a very tangible quality to these intangible places. and the varnish that goes over them creates this honeyed tone that becomes very nostalgic. And it's nostalgia for a future that doesn't exist anymore. We thought all this technology would get us someplace, and we're wondering where exactly it is. I began experimenting with much more hyperbolic spaces and the presentation of them in different formats that would mirror more of our screen-based existence. And they became increasingly dystopian and aggressive. So these last few slides are ones that are in Material Index. And, I really want to underline that this series really brought back home for me the impossibility of disentangling reality from our images of it. And that's part of the messiness of the quality of these images. And the condition, it's sort of primordial. And I find that to be the condition that everything arises from, the forms and the incidents that take shape within it. It's somewhere between the imaginary and the actual, and the blurring of those boundaries. And there's also the quality of the lack of the presence of a photographer in all these images, which is so important in photography. You always understand that people are there when they make that image, but this is so desolate. How could, and so far removed and alien. So how could anyone have actually been there, let alone myself? And I see myself as archiving these artifacts and this world that simultaneously exists and does not, and that is continually reconstructing itself through the images of itself. And this image in particular really exemplifies that, in that you see a very flat world, a very naked sky, but then somehow through a glitch in the system, it caught in the window the reflection of reality as was taking place beyond the machine. In that exact moment, you see a dark Midwestern stormy sky. And this final image was the last one I made recently, and it became a little bit like 2001 Space Odyssey for me, in that we have this enormous monolith and we're not really sure what it's about. It represents some kind of advancement in technology and we go crazy for it, but we're not sure if it's benevolent or if it's a foe or where it really occupies in our world, but it's certainly affecting the world around it. That's it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Lisa. And I just want to point out that, Lisa has a BFA in painting from the Rhode Island School of Design. Is that right? From RISD. But I met Lisa as a student in my class in continuing education years ago. And we have now studied together kind of on and off for a few years. And I just have always been so moved and impressed by your philosophical frameworks around your practice, and particularly in regards to materials. So thank you so much for that presentation. And I look forward to asking you some questions later. So
thank you.
And now we'll move on to Yam Chu. Yam Chu Oh, I met Yam Chu also at SVA shortly after Yam Chu graduated from our MFA Fine Arts program. Teaching a variety of courses, everything from writing to art practice. And Yam Chu, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you, Karen. Okay, let me just share my screen. Okay. Can everyone see my screen okay? I think it's still all right. Thank you. Okay.
Yes, looks good.
Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for being here. I know it's lunch hour, so hopefully we make this enriching for all of you while you're eating your favorite food somewhere in the world. My name is Yam Chu Oh. I'm an artist, I'm an educator, and I'm also a storyteller, and you'll see why. This is one of my pieces that's on view at Material Index at the Affordable Art Fair at the moment, and I'll talk a little bit about it later. So I'm an artist, educator, and storyteller, and my work primarily explores a circumstance, so the situation around us, and everything that contributes to where I am, who I am, and what I'm doing, and what I'm thinking, and time. And I'm very interested in attention, and how it leads into awareness and also mindfulness eventually. And I do that through a lot of thinking through history, a lot of it personal. I think a lot about relationships, and I think a lot about the everyday. And I believe that there's just art around us everywhere, and there is a lot to be had from art in the everyday. This is my website, really just to give you a sense of the different things that I do. I make sculptures, I paint, I draw, I take photographs, I do little projects here and there, but I don't restrict myself to a particular medium. And a lot of times, the idea actually drives the appropriate medium for my work. I love drawing. I think it's kind of like the grounding and the really basic part of an art making. This is a self-portrait that I made in 2016, and it's actually on newsprint. It's actually the Financial Times. It's something I read. I had a previous life in the corporate world, and I read the Financial Times every single day, and that kind of translated into something that I do. I also take photographs. This is a very recent photograph. In fact, just last month or two, I was lucky enough to go back to Singapore to visit family. That's where I'm from. I was quarantined for 15 days in downtown Singapore in a hotel. And this was my view. It was quite magical and beautiful. But again, going back to the idea of circumstance and time, I've been away from Singapore for more than a decade now. And there's so many buildings there that I don't recognize. They've all sprung up during the time that I was away. And there were buildings that were opened the year after I left in 2010. So a lot of thinking through that, and also engaging with light, because I was doing a project, a piece of work for Sotheby's Institute of Art on US time in Singapore, which was crazy. So I was experiencing and encountering light in a different way. So during that time in quarantine, I made one piece of art a day. So that's what I was doing there. But my first love is painting. So a bit like Lisa, she was trained in that. I still love painting, but I haven't really painted for a while. But when I started painting, I very quickly went into abstraction very happily, and I've never turned back since. And that has even kind of seeped into my sculptures, which I will come to shortly. This is possibly my favorite painting. It's quite big, 60 by 48. A lot of my work talks about loss, regret, relationships, sorrow, unfortunately, but that's what it is. Yeah, and this is one of the earlier pieces of work, and I just wanted to show, and there's a lot more, but I'm just showing a few things here. Then, why am I showing this? So this is me and my late father, who unfortunately passed away in 2001, the year that 9/11 happened, actually. But this was me in my teenage years, much fitter and much slimmer, but helping him with his sort of chores. So my late father was what we call a Karong Guni man in Singapore. And that's the equivalent of the American junk man, or in a lot of developing worlds, they are called waste pickers. And I'm showing this picture because I grew up helping him with his sort of junk business, if you like. And we collect junk, things that people throw away, people discard, they don't want, or used materials or things we find. So wood, paper, cardboard, metal, copper, you name it, we've collected them and resold them to merchants for profit. And that's how my late father supported a family of 9. I'm showing this because this has influenced my obsession with materials. I grew up surrounded by all kinds of materials, and I'm really interested in how they're prone to associations, how you look at something and elicit emotions. They have a lot of symbolic and metaphorical power that I'm really interested in. So I use them to tell stories. So it all started with this piece actually in 2017. This was kind of months before graduate school in New York. I was living in Baltimore, in Maryland, and I've been collecting materials on my commute to school or to MICA, Maryland Institute College of Art, where I spent a year as well. And this is a tree branch and raffia string that's kind of like a poor man's string, and just some metal piece I found. And on my late father's death anniversary in 2017, I just made this piece out of the blue, and I felt like something was pushing me and compelling me to do it. A little close-up of it. Another one, it's called Penance for 51501, which is actually the dates that he passed away in 2001. So from this piece, everything came after that. So, and I'll talk about that a little bit. So this is what is currently installed at the Metropolitan Pavilion in Manhattan. These are the works that Keren has curated into Material Index, and so aptly named because it's material, and I'm really obsessed with it. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the pieces here. And this is an important piece because this is something I dragged back to my studio in graduate school from the streets of New York. It was a tattered frame, and I don't even know what it's used for, but I sanded it, I cleaned it, I sanded it down, I painted it, and I was thinking really hard about how I love it despite its faults and despite its, there's a bracket at the bottom here that's missing. I thought it was going to fall apart, but in the end, I thought about how I want to wrap my arms around it, and that's where the blue frame comes from. Okay, right. And this is another piece in the show. It's called Floating on Detritus. I was experimenting with hanging, softer material, and also gravity. And these two pieces are in there too. The left one is actually an abstraction of my late father. It's an abstract portrait of him. And the right one is actually about my mother and her unwavering loyalty to her late husband, despite after 20 years of him passing away. This is a piece. Unfortunately, 2018 was challenging for me. I had 6 bereavements in my immediate family. So this was a piece when my sister-in-law passed away at 29, unfortunately, suddenly. And this was after the funeral and all that, and me thinking about, I wish I could turn back time. And this kind of came out of it, the time bender. This was me thinking about my very traditional Asian parents and how they express their love through buying you things and providing for you, and actually buying food and supper, actually, particularly about this one, but they don't really hug you after a certain age, which is unfortunate. This is a piece of my late father when he was really ill. This is a detail shot, actually using just bubble wrap and LED light. Quite eerie, to be honest. And then in 2020, in the year of the pandemic, and until now, I'm still not done with found and used materials. I've been making work, still using that. This was actually made from 2 face shields when I traveled on Qatar Airlines, and they issued it mandatorily. I had to wear them. This was about relationships. I was thinking a lot about my immediate family and my husband, actually. And this was something about me and my niece, who was born in July last year. I bonded with her in Singapore, and I came back and I made this from C-section wound protection straps. this is a piece about my mom sort of being handicapped and weighed down by something as simple as laundry. It's called the Laundry Handicap. And this is me bonding with my 3 nephews in Singapore and coming back, and based on a mid-autumn, a festival called the Mid-Autumn Festival, thinking about reuniting with them. And this is me thinking about myself and my process, and thinking sometimes you get little sort of insecurities and you think, ooh, the imposter syndrome, and it's using just a salt shaker, you know, worth your salt or not in that sense. And me responding to just my environment against circumstance. So this was made recently using my own hair, and I was really interested in attention. So I was trying to pay attention to hair. I have long hair and hair falling on me. So every strand in this piece was hair that I felt fell on my arms or my shoulders. And I recorded the date and the exact time I felt it. I just have to put in the plug. So again, responding to circumstances, I recently adopted a rescue beagle, and he has his own Instagram account. But I started this Instagram account with this post: how can we humbly learn from Earth's beautiful creatures? And he's teaching me so much.
This is amazing, Yamchu. Next time I visit, I want to meet your dog.
Yes,
this is very
please.
Exciting.
Thank you. And the last slide, really, we were talking about education and informal and otherwise, self-directed and otherwise. And these are all the different things that I thought was important, but we can come back to this later.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Yamchu.
you.
Thank you. And I'll never forget, Yamchu was one of the last people I saw in person before the pandemic hit. We had a beautiful, I don't even want to call it a studio visit, because it was so much more than that. It was it was just a visit, and it was beautiful. And it actually really, I took a lot away from that visit into the pandemic and contemplation and thinking about what it means to live with your art and live in your practice. So thank you so much, Yamchu.
Thank you, Karen.
And next up, we have Arantxa. I met Arantxa also shortly after she graduated from the MFA Fine Arts program here at SVA, along with Yamchu. Arantxa is also an alum of our summer residency programs, which are very active, engaged historical programs, legacy programs here at SVA. And I've just been really, again, moved and touched by Arantxa's relationship to material and heritage and community. So without further ado, Arantxa.
Hello, hi everybody. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you so much for everyone. I was surprised by how many people signed up. My name is Arantxa Ximena Rodriguez. I am a white woman with brown hair, pink glasses. Some people say that I look like a mouse. And I have a background of a piece made out of paper with blue and green colors. So without further ado, let me share my screen. There we go. Wait, sorry. There we go. Yeah, so I'm Arantxa Ximena Rodriguez. I am an artist that comes from Mexico City, and I studied my MFA in Fine Arts at SVA. I graduated in 2019, and actually Yamchu was my studio neighbor. So yeah, all my MFA in Fine Arts, I shared a lot with Yamchu. In the summer residency at SVA, I started experimenting with store-bought yarn. Literally just bought yarn, started stapling in the corners of my studio. And when I had studio visits, people often asked me, where are you from? Are you from Peru, Bolivia, Mexico? And I was like, yeah, I'm from Mexico. And people were like, your work looks very Latin American. And I'm like, what does that mean? What does my work looking Latin American mean, right? Like we can just have a whole conversation about that. But I was like, okay, like if people say that, I'm gonna own it and go very deep with it. So I decided to go to Mexican textile communities and start meeting the people and see how they process the yarns. So I got a bunch of yarn and went back to New York City and started experimenting with actual yarn from my country. And I started doing all these installations, literally stapling them in the corners of my studio. And while I was doing them, I realized that I have to be very present while making them. If I'm not 100% there, the yarn drapes or it breaks. So I realized that I have to do an active meditation while I'm making them. So I decided to own that as well. And also because I've been 6 years studying Tibetan Buddhism. So I started doing this group of work, which led into my thesis work, which is about the trifecta between my spiritual practice, my Mexican heritage, and my practice as an artist. So I did all these string installations that are ephemeral because once, like, if I have to move out of the space, I have to destroy the pieces. So actually the only one that I have right now is the one that I'm showing at Affordable Art Fair. And I was a little bit against of doing this because I was like, no, my pieces have to be ephemeral. But the curators for my thesis show were like, how are you going to do this in the walls of the gallery? The walls are concrete and you have 3 days to make it. So that's why it's the only piece that has survived so far from this group of work. But I'm grateful because now I've been able to show it in different parts of the world and different art fairs. I made a book, which is actually my thesis. You can see it on my website. The whole PDF is there, and it's called The Thread That Weaves Us All. After my thesis, after I graduated from SVA, I decided to be a little bit less purist and go again with like store-bought yarn and spray paint and like just experimenting again with different materials. And I made these 2 pieces, which you can see also at the fair. After I graduated as an international student, we get 1 year to live in the United States with a visa that's called OPT. So in that year after my MFA, I got accepted to a residency called Project Art, which they get an artist and they link it to different libraries around New York City to teach kids free art lessons. So I started working on this residency. It's amazing because it's kind of like a job and an artist residency as well. So you teach kids, but you do also your own personal practice. So I was 1 year teaching them, and then the pandemic hit and they kind of stopped it, but I was very surprised how they really fast moved into online. So then I started teaching my kids online, and the experience teaching them online surprised me a lot because I thought it was going to be a nightmare, and on the contrary, it resulted way better than in person because I was able to focus with the kids, see exactly what each of them was doing. Like my relationship with them became even more personal. I didn't finish drained after the class like I used to do when it was in person. So my experience teaching art kids online was amazing. So during the residency, when I was in the library, since I don't have that much space, I can't make a mess, etc., I just decided to start a drawing practice. So I did a bunch of drawings during my residency there. And for the final project with Project Art, what I decided to do is I had 25 children. So I divided this drawing in 25 parts, and I sent each parent one part of the drawing for each kid to alterate by themselves, however they wanted. So they started doing each piece of my drawing, and then they send it back to Project Art. I put it all together and I fixed it a little bit, you know, I outlined it to make it look like complete. And yeah, we finished doing like a complete piece, and I sent to each kid to their house the certificate of authenticity of the piece. So it's a piece that we did together. If anybody's interested in buying it, part of the profits are going to Project Art. And I became so obsessed with this drawing that I even did another iteration, which is the one that I have here in the back. And yeah, so this is another iteration of that piece. It's on paper with again, with like all these different materials. For a matter of time, I'm gonna go a little bit fast. And these drawings are also part of Project Art's residency, and I'm showing them as well in Affordable Art Fair. The difference is that these ones I did put color. The other ones are black and white. So my latest project, the one that I literally just did 6 months ago, I received an email from an investment bank in Midtown, New York City, asking me if I was able to replicate this image that you see right now into a 3D artwork. And you know, like just, I mean, I can't say coming out of the pandemic because we're still in the pandemic. It's just so weird. But like being in the pandemic, I saw this and I'm like, of course I can do it. I had no idea how I was gonna do it, but I'm like, yeah, of course I can turn this into an art object. So they sent me the image and I started experimenting with it, doing a bunch of different iterations, trying different materials. And what I did was this. I was very fortunate to get lent a space where I could present the piece, which is this beautiful like studio space that you see in movies. I was very, very lucky, and I presented the piece in this space. I wanted to focus this talk into art and education, and something that I have to say about this project, it was a huge learning experience for me because I had never dealt with corporate America, and that was a thing. It was insane. It was having to like do all these corporate emails and everything's back and forward and everybody wants to take a part on it. And really this past 6 months were super intense. And it was a huge learning curve for me, not only how to make a piece that I had like no idea how to do, learning a new language, learning how to deal with very difficult people, learning how to like try to get a little bit of self-care in the middle of that process, learning that I have to do contracts before doing a huge project. And so it was a huge learning experience for me. This piece is 16 feet wide, it's wood, it's all hand painted. So I cut the car in a CDC machine. I painted the car by hand with spray paint. I did the strings, I did the texture with sawdust. And if you go to my website, you can see a video of all the process of this piece. And when I finished the project, I was like, I have to talk so much about this. And I was very, these are some details of the piece. And when I finished the project, I decided to write my story and send it to Hyperallergic, and they got my story out. So if you go to Hyperallergic and you want to read a little bit more about this project, you can find it there. I was very fortunate to get a lot of advice from people at SVA, teachers such as Sharon Loudon. Seth Rodney was the one that like saw this article and was like, of course, let's push it forward. So I'm very grateful with my school. SVA has been incredibly supportive during my whole journey as an artist in New York City. 2 years after graduating, SVA is still there and it's in my heart too. So yeah, that's me. I'm going to be in the fair today from 6:30 to 8. I'm gonna be there tomorrow from like 2 to 4. And Sunday I'm gonna be maybe like around 3. So if you wanna come by and say hi, I would love to meet you. And any questions, you can send me email. That's my website and my Instagram. And thank you so much for listening to me and this wonderful opportunity.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Arantxa. And I just want to say that, you know, I was following your commission story on Instagram, and one of the things I most appreciate about you is that, you know, you really let us into your process, both in terms of your material process and also in terms of your professional process. And I think that having social media be this sort of community space where we get to learn about each other's worlds and learn from other artists how to do things and how not to do things and what happens when you do certain things. And it's, I think, a real gift for the art community. So thank you. Thank you to all three of you for your wonderful presentations. Even though I'm very familiar with your work, it's still been an absolute pleasure to learn more about it and learn where you've landed today in 2021. So now we'll move on to the panel discussion, and I think you'll be able to see the four of us sort of spotlit if you keep it in presenter mode. So just give us one moment. And please also feel free to put any questions you might have in the chat. And I will be sort of scanning the chat and adding to the questions. So I just want to start with the theme of the panel, the educations of an artist. Each of you came to SVA from very different backgrounds. Can you speak a bit about how your particular educational experiences, continuing education courses, residencies, graduate programs, as well as the teaching that you each do in different capacities, how have they contributed to your development as an artist?
If you want, I'll start. So something very funny about teaching is that you think that you are giving something to someone else, that you think you're actually teaching something to someone else. And a lot of the times it's the other way around. It's you, the one that finished learning so much. So something that I love about teaching as an artist is that it just comes back. It's just, yeah. So that's something that I want to say that I've had that experience.
Lisa, do you want to say anything before? Otherwise, I'll go.
Well, you know, I do not directly teach. I am taught greatly by others. I am, you know, as Arantxa said, you know, corporations teach us, and, you know, Google has taught me enormously, which is dark. But also, you know, I found my way into continuing ed through other friends, and I found my way into particular classrooms because of that. You know, it's kind of like the trodden path that goes ahead of you. And a particular group of students and I formed after a certain class taught by Sylvia Wolf. And we created a collective that I would have been very happy to produce images for today, although I cannot do so on their behalf because it's yet to be released and it's not my, you know, right to do this. So I look forward to the day when that comes to light, which will be very, very soon. But we came together around the courses that Sylvia teaches, which are the Invisible and Seeing is Thinking. And we continued the discussion beyond there, and the teacher became part of us and we became part of that as well. And it's learning enormously from multitudes of perspectives that you would never have known or considered otherwise, because you, out of chance and choice, you're all there at the same time.
So I see this from various perspectives that Keren has highlighted as well. So in terms of teaching, I was really lucky to be offered a faculty position at SVA after graduating, and I taught freshman writing and literature, a mandatory course to first-year students. And I think teaching really, I love that it keeps me on my toes. I'm kept abreast of things I have to, and through students, you know, I'm not that young, but I feel young because of them. But also, I just love that there is this mutual exchange between a teacher and a student. You're all constantly learning from each other, and I get to kind of shape them as young beings, moving into, coming into their own. But also what Keren talked about, residencies and, you know, other CE related programs. I'll just mention one quickly, which is I took the CE printmaking course because my process has always been very organic and sort of fluid and very intuitive, but I wanted to do something to challenge myself. I wanted something kind of that's methodical, that I need to plan, and so printmaking was the perfect one. And I worked with one of a really wonderful faculty member, and I learned tremendously from it. So I don't think we stop learning from anywhere really. Our practice is really broad and it's really well-rounded that way.
Thank you so much. So well said, all of you. And I'll also just piggyback real quick on what you said, Lisa. I'm glad you said you don't directly teach, because you do teach, and I'll just attest to that as having you a student in my class for many years, that I feel that I've learned so much from you, and also from Arantxa and Yamchu, just in our studio visits and conversations. So that's part of what inspired me to create this conversation. Another question I have, you each have unique relationships with this country. Lisa, I believe you were born and raised in the US, or definitely
Yeah.
spent most of your life in the US,
Yeah.
yes. And Arantxa and Yamchu, you both arrived here as immigrants. Can you share some insight into how your use of material connects you to your origins, as well as to the land that we sit on now?
Well, I'll say something quickly that something comes to mind that so I think all of us, we're constantly surrounded by all these materials, and I don't think any one of us can detach ourselves from any material really. You know, we all make associations and to materials. For me, especially when I went to grad school in New York, I was doing what it's called derive, which is this sort of method by the Situationist International, sort of roaming the city aimlessly and responding to materials on the street. And then I was dragging them back to my studio like a mouse, or like a cat, sorry, dragging a mouse back and then responding to them. So that's kind of local, and I keep doing that even in my home country, Singapore. So when I get to visit my family in Singapore twice during the pandemic, luckily, I was collecting material and bringing them back to America. And there is this really interesting tension between something that's very particular to me and then something that's, for lack of a better word, I would say kind of exotic to the audience here. So I find that association and how it elicits different emotions very interesting. And it constantly challenges me to think about how those materials will make people respond or not. And whether it's something very personal or does it have universal resonance?
I grew up in the suburbs of New York City. And so it's a very densely populated area, and there's no space without use. Even the free space has been designated specifically as free space, so it's not exactly neutral. And I grew up with a father who was a contractor and who also had studied architecture. So everything I do is revolving around an idea of construction and building. And at the same time, because there's so little space, you know, historical places would get uprooted, moved to another place and replanted. And it just was moving history to another place, and everyone believed it. Or things would be habitually, you know, kind of taken down and rebuilt in an old style to kind of inform people, you know, subtly through a psychogeographical tactic on the ways of society or how everything should be or be improved by looking backwards. So that both informs my interest in kind of looking at traditional materials, but at the same time looking at new ways in which you can like use them and kind of expose them, how you can make these invisible processes of decision making and construction kind of exposed through their errors, through how you make them show their hand, especially with the Google Earth technology.
I have to say, well, living in New York City is completely different than living in Mexico. That's stupid to say. That's something that surprises me is what you find in the stoops or in the trash outside your house in New York City. Like, you find treasures. It's incredible the materials that you can find walking in the streets. So to keep the question focused on that, I have a project that I didn't share in this presentation that I will share a little bit now. Is I created an alter ego called, I created an alter ego who is a gallerist called De la Mer y Tu Arte, where I had the opportunity to study artistic makeup for a while. So I'm very good with like makeup and prosthetics and all that. So I made this character. I'm gonna share my screen for a sec. I'm gonna go to her Instagram. So she has her own Instagram, and De la Mer y Tu Arte, which is like this alter ego. She literally analyzes materials and trash in the streets, and talks about them as if they were art, because they're literally art. So an example is like this donut, and what De la Mer says is she represents an artist that is anonymous, completely anonymous. So and she talks with a British accent. So I'm going to read it with a British accent of Delamere. So she's like, the artist wanted to show a clash of two opposite feelings at the same time. Can it be possible to feel bliss and disgust at the same time? Putting our mind into the task of deciding what sensation is deeper, the beautiful view that creates a craving for freshly baked donuts, or the disgust of them being wasted and thrown to the ground, transforming them into something uneatable. This piece puts a lot of matters into stake. There's also a criticism into how we could help others, but sometimes the same system makes it impossible. Can we save the donuts that haven't touched the ground? Why are they there in the first place? The artist was keen in making the spectator form this and many questions regarding this piece. And you, do not restrain yourself from commenting, please. The artist reads all your comments and bakes in gratitude. So each piece has like its own still. So yeah, Delamere came out of like finding materials in the forests of New York.
I had no idea, and you know that I'm going to follow you immediately. That's awesome. Thank you. And I actually have two questions from the audience that I'm going to mash together because I think they're great. Leah was asking about Lisa's educational journey from painter to photo and image-based work. And then Juliana asks how each of you experienced with different materials while still maintaining a distinct style. And I think that those are very related questions. So just sort of thinking about how you each kind of move through and between materials and, media, and also visual voice.
Well, I'll go first. So I was taught to be a painter by my father, and he and so I went to school for it. It was what was going to happen. It was just, that was the destination. And I realized once I got there that his style of painting, accomplished, was not going to fly in this world. And I also began to question my relationship to this because, and I said it in my talk, and which was, painters can make anything. They can make anything out of any place. And for me, there just didn't feel like there was anything at stake in that world. I needed to hold on to something and owe to something. And I wanted to pull from something. I didn't want it to just be completely ungrounded. And also growing up with my father being in the architecture business, I was very interested in landscape and architecture, and photography was the natural mate. In architecture is a very solid thing, but also the images of it are very important to our society. And so I just decided to walk away from architecture as well and pivot into photography, which just seemed to be the best solution to that. And how I navigate between using different forms of photography or photographic approaches is that still coming from a painterly background, I will always be interested in material, and I always want to get my hands dirty. But also I am very keen towards composition. And so light and shadow for me really pulls that down. It takes away the meaning that color can often overlay onto it. And so I have that basic binary structure that will always carry through, and also the sensibilities of impermanence and shifting perspectives and the psychology of space and the production of it. So that's how I kind of keep it cohesive, even though my work really ranges from, completely abstract to representational.
So I would say something about, just to answer the question about experiencing with materials and maintaining a distinct style. Style is a tricky word in the art world, as we know. But I think there's a certain sort of look and feel in pretty much everyone's work. And in my case, I can't speak for everyone. I do hold quite a strong belief that a lot of us, in fact, I think most artists, if not all, we don't get to choose what we make, because a lot of times the art chooses us, or the medium chooses us. Like for example, I know Keren is playing with cyanotypes now, which is really wonderful. And I just kind of fell into this in a way. And in terms of so I've just been constantly playing with it and constantly being curious and experimenting, you know, soft material versus hard material. In my last body of work, the one that's showing at the Affordable Art Fair, towards the end of that body of work, I started to think about other mediums that could come in. So I played with light and I played with LED tubes. But I think at the end of the day, whatever, I didn't kind of decide that my work would be of this certain style or this certain color palette or this certain materials. In fact, along the way, people told me, your work seems to be very muted. Your work seems to have very distilled colors, and there's a certain minimalist look to it. It all just kind of came to it, and I think a lot of it is trusting your own gut feel and your instincts and just making it. And you can make 100 different types of work in different mediums. There will always be you in it, and I believe so.
It's so funny because the question, like, how can you work with so many different materials and still keep like the same style? It's so funny because I've been told that in the past, and I don't feel that they're the same style at all, but people do see it that way. It's super funny. When I lived in Mexico, I worked literally for 9 years in kind of like the same style. I did a lot of things inspired in sacred geometry and fractals and very psychedelic. So I was doing that for like 9 years. I came to New York to study my MFA in fine arts, and I had a very, very harsh mentor, which was very difficult, but was great, you know, because I learned so much. And she completely broke my practice and said, you have to get out of that. You have to do different things. And I really opened myself up trying different things. So then the string installations came up, and then the drawings came up, and I started to be a little bit worried because I was like, as an artist, you kind of have to like keep your trademark, to call it a way, like your style. So people, when they see your work, they know it's yours. And I was like, oh, but I'm doing like all these different things. And then I just decided to let it go. I'm like whatever, you know, if I do this and I do that, and nothing has to do with anything that I do, that's gonna be fine. You know, I don't care. And it's so funny because when people see my work, it's like, I love how your work evolves from one thing to another. And I'm like, what do you mean? It's like, I love how you evolved the fractals into string installations. And I'm like, wow, it's crazy that you see it that way. I don't see it that way at all. Or people like, I love how you open the fractal and now you're doing like all these geometric shapes. And it's like, wow, people see it as an evolution of my work, and I don't see that at all. But I think I guess that's a good thing. You know, it just happens organically, I guess.
It's absolutely an evolution. And my take on it is that, you know, Liam Chu mentioned the word style can be sort of a tricky word in the art world. And I think that there's something that happens when we shift the perspective to thinking through our thoughts and thinking through our sort of the coherent ideas and how ideas develop themselves philosophically over time. And the form of those ideas changes. So it might turn from a fractal to a string installation, or from a painting to, you know, a tintype, but somehow the thread of the idea has actually maintained its coherence. It's just evolved and developed over time, right? Maybe one last quick question, which is Leah's asking about the experience of reading a review about your work. And I just want to sort of expand that out and ask you, and this is something I think about a lot as well as an artist, is, do you feel like that there is a clear transition for you from being a student to being a professional practitioner? Or do you feel like it's not as clear of a boundary? Was there a moment, particularly, you know, I think in the years right after school, like, was there a moment where you felt like you pivoted or landed into a professional practice? Or does it feel more of a fluid kind of back and forth for you?
So for me, it was very funny because, I mean, I'm 33 years old. To be honest, I'm young, and you know how slow everything is in the arts. So, I mean, I'm super mentalized that maybe I'll have gallery representation in 10 more years, because who knows, you know, it's very slow, the art process and the arts world. But when I was in Mexico, I started doing pretty well. My last solo show in Mexico, and I don't want to brag. I want to say this like super objectively. but my last solo show in Mexico before coming to New York was like a blast. Like it got reviewed in a lot of newspapers. I got a lot of press. The space was full. Like it was a huge success. So I came to New York feeling like I was a badass. So I arrived to New York City to SVA. And in SVA, I realized that I was in a classroom full of 30 people way more talented than me, you know? And I was like, wow. So it was great because it was a super humbling experience for me. And I came from like kind of like being a professional artist. I mean, I say quote because I was very young and I honestly had no idea, you know? So I came from having something I came from like a little mountain that I was in the top to like a huge mountain that I had to climb. So for me, it was kind of like doing a process backwards that really helped my career. And a lot of people in Mexico said like, why are you gonna go and study if you're doing so well in Mexico? Like you're gonna like stop your life for like 2 years. And I even like closed my social media. Like that's how much I went inside. And I'm like, this is something that maybe is gonna feel like some steps back to take me like 10 more steps forward, you know? And it's a process that I just have to do. So that was very difficult, but now I realize that made me like much more of a solid artist. Like I even dare to say that before coming to SVA, I was really not an artist. I was maybe just like a great graphic designer. You know, I feel that what I learned in SVA, how to do work, talk about my work, learn from the works of others, learn about the art world was what really gave me a solid foundation for the professional artist that I really, really want to be. And yeah, now everything's way slower. I'm pretty like away from like the Mexican community, which I want to come back when I'm more like that's why even I have like this tattoo of Mexico in my arm, because when I left, I'm like, I'm gonna come back to Mexico to give everything back to my country. But I'm very mentalized that maybe I've been already 4 years in New York. It's maybe gonna be like 6 because of my visa that I have right now. And I'm very mentalized to learn so many things in New York to give back. So all this process of being a professional artist and a student has been like a mix. And I feel that you have to be a student all the time. If you are not a student all the time, then you're just not gonna do well in life. That's very philosophical and corny, but it's true.
Yeah, I would say, I think very well said, Arantxa, about being a student all the time. And I think in terms of, just to answer Keren's question directly, that I think there is kind of a transition from being a student. Well, I had a corporate life and sort of art before, and then I went back to school and then came out of that and deciding that I'm going to do this sort of more dedicated and more focused. So there is a bit of a transition, but I think it's kind of fluid. But you definitely feel it once you're in the real world and not in the school context where you're shielded from everything and you just think you have the privilege of thinking about art every second of the day for 2 years, and that's it. You have to survive as an artist. So that's that. And then I just wanted to also answer Leah's question about, when you read a review, what do you learn from it? I think definitely, but I think as an artist, my responsibility as an artist, I make the art, and once I release it into the world and whoever's eyes come upon it, I don't have any control at all. I love to read the reviews, but I don't have any control, and I'm at the mercy of critics and everything else. But I see it as a learning process as well, because it's interesting how others see what I intend, and I'm at peace if it moves someone, even if it just moves one person, I'm happy with that. So, but I have no control on how others will receive my work based on their own context and circumstances.
Yeah, I mean, to agree with both Arantxa and Arantxa, I think you always have to resist calcifying, completely. And when I was in undergrad, they were always on us to be more and more professional, which was more about, finishing projects, presenting them well, etc. That's one form of professionalism. The other form of professionalism is how well do you represent yourself? And that's really hard. And that you learn through experience. You just have to do it. You have to keep making the errors or finding your way, and, good, bad, and ugly. And I think it's very hard to say where the line is. I think it also comes down to the quality of the idea behind it, because, like, said before, it's you come out of that ivory castle and then you actually have to take your discourse and open it up so much more to everyone else and account for real world variabilities. And in terms of, reviews, if someone is really upset and they take you to task for something, but they get the task right and they're upset about it, that's one thing. Okay, fine, they can disagree. If they find something in it that really moves them and they write something beautiful or something you didn't think about before, that's wonderful. But if they interview you and then come away and then write something that has nothing to do with what you talked about, then that's a little like hard to take, because then you start getting into that messy part of reality, which is like, where two pieces do not find cohesion and you just wonder what happened. And that slippage scares me a little. So that would be my response to the reviews.
Thank you so much. And then just in like 3 or 5 words, what's next for all of you? Just in a few words, what's next? Besides getting some sleep.
Well, I have I'm very, very grateful. I applied to a grant, the City Corps grant, and I got it. I was super blown away. And with that grant, I'm going to make a mural for Lincoln Hospital at the Bronx. And so yeah, I'm donating a mural to the hospital with that
Amazing.
Grant.
Go ahead, Lisa, sorry.
Me? You? Go.
Oh, yeah. Go ahead. Yeah, okay. I thought you were going to say something.
So I will be at Philadelphia Open Studios. I am part of the Center for Emerging Visual Artists Fellowship finalists, and they are including the finalists as part of their programming in the cohort for a year, which is wonderful. So I'll be taking my work down to Philly and making new friends and finding new places and things. I have not been to Philly in a while, regrettably and embarrassingly. And also I will be going to the Netherlands for some rest and seeing my work up there at the Noorderlicht Festival, the Makeable Mind, and a small fun show at Fondazione 107 in Turin, where I'll be exhibiting a small side project in a group show.
Amazing.
Wonderful. And so I have, I'm preparing for another show with actually a collective that I'm part of. And Keren mentioned, the idea of collectives, and to me, that's a really important part of sort of education. So I belong to this collective called Atlantica Collective, and it's a collective of international thinkers, philosophers, composers, visual artists. We're all over the world, some in Ukraine, Prague, someone in Canada, in Eastern USA and all that. Anyway, we are coming together and we are preparing for a show in Montana at Billings. And it's a show that brings together all these different practitioners and thinkers and how we even came together in the first place. So that's quite exciting. So that's happening in December through January.
Incredible. So no sleep for any of you, basically.
No.
Okay. That's the true educations of an artist. You'll never sleep again. Thank you so much to all 3 of you for your participation in the exhibition, your patience for the pandemic to ease up a little bit for us to be able to have it, and for your contributions today in this panel discussion, and for being part of the SVA-CE community. It's truly been a pleasure to work with all of you, and I am also looking forward to continuing our creative relationship moving forward. And thank you to our guests, to all of you, great questions and enthusiasm. Nika has posted some links to the chat, so I hope that you all will get a chance to see the exhibition Material Index at the Affordable Art Fair. It's at the Metropolitan Pavilion, which is on 18th Street and between 7th and 8th, 6th and 7th, 7th and 8th, 7th and 8th. 6th and 7th, thank you. 18th Street, West 18th Street between 6th and 7th. It's up through Sunday, so please check it out. You can go into the lobby and check it out and then go see the rest of the fair. We look forward to seeing you at more events and to staying in touch. So have a great rest of your day or night, everyone, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.